Camera Corner. In this brand new series, I take a look at old cameras that I happen to find interesting and cool. Some of them are genuine classics and have rightfully earned their place in history. Others were just ordinary cameras that people once used every day without thinking anything of, but in all cases they can still be used today to take fantastic photographs. So without further ado, let's have a look at today's camera. Okay, so in this episode we're going to be having a look at the Pentax S1. This was part of a long and illustrious range of Pentax cameras starting in 1957 with the original Asahi Pentax. That was a camera that really, although it wasn't the first sort of Japanese SLR by any stretch, it was the first kind of easily handled one. It had a logical and much more modern setup of controls and dials than was previously seen, and featured the pentaprism on it, which made viewfinding a lot easier than previous editions, which had the sort of viewfinder you looked in and the picture was upside down and stuff like that. They came up with this basic design back then in 1957, and these are really incremental changes that they made, and really the body designs of the Pentaxes didn't change a lot from those early days in the mid-50s, when they were first playing around with SLRs, right the way through until the end of the Spotmatic range at the end of the, mid of the 1970s, up to about 1976. So it's worth giving a quick potted history about the S-series of cameras, because as those of you that follow classic cameras and things like that will readily recognise the fact that this says S1 by no means suggests that it's the first one in the series, and in fact it was actually the last to be produced with the S moniker. You started with the after the Asahi Pentax, which came out in 1957, the Asahi Pentax S came out in 1958, the following year, and it was really a very small change but quite an important one for the future of SLRs, and they actually standardized the incremental steps in between the shutter speeds on all the more modern cameras, and right the way through to the DSLRs that you have these days. On the shutter dial here, let's move that up a little closer so you can see. You see you've got pretty standard things there: 500th, 250th, 125th, 60th, 30th, 15th, so on. But believe it or not, the original Asahi Pentax from 1957 didn't have that. It had a 500th, a 200th, a 100th, a 50th, a 25th, a 10th, and then a fourth, a half, so on. So it was slightly different, and it wasn't as, I guess, mathematically accurate as you get with the standardized system that then came out later, and everybody else was using it. And so they adopted that. From there, the S2 then came out the following year in 1959. Again, these were incremental changes that happened, but one of the nice things that they included on that, and I don't know if the camera can pick it up, should do just about, there's a little red dot just there. That dot tells you that the shutter is primed. So when you wind this camera on, I won't do it now because it has actually got a film in it. It's a camera I use regularly, this one. When you wind that on, that little red dot appears to tell you that it's cocked and it's primed and you're ready to take the next shot. So that's quite a nice feature on there. The S3 then came out after that and included for the first time 1,000th of a second shutter speed. You can see on the dial here it actually only goes up to 500th, which all of the earlier ones did. We'll come on to this one a little bit because that's it's not quite what it appears on there, but the 1,000th of a second shutter speed came out with the S3. Also, and again, I don't know how easy it's going to be to pick up on here, but there's a little notch just in the top of this this shutter sort of control wheel here, and that allowed for the first time for the fitting of Pentax's light meter that would actually fit onto the top of the camera there, because these cameras don't have internal light meters. There's no through the lens metering or anything like that happens with these cameras. You have to use either an external meter or Sunny 16 or something like that. So the other great and important feature when the S3 came out was that it had for the first time the opportunity or the ability to use these automatic Takuma lenses. The difference being that with the earlier models, the aperture was wide open to allow for a very bright viewfinder, and that allowed easy focusing, but then you had to manually stop down the aperture to what you wanted it for the exposure for the actual picture taking before you actually press the shutter, and there was a little button on the side there, the lens that would actually shut the aperture down to what you wanted. Later editions of the camera actually had automatic apertures in there, so when you half press the shutter, that would then shut the aperture down to what it was preset on the on the aperture ring here, so that you could take the picture without having to remember to press a button on the side there. So that was the the other kind of big feature there, and as I say, the thousandth of a second shutter appeared on there. In 1960, this camera came out. This was the S1, and this was designed to be a budget version of the S3, and so what they did was they removed the 1000th of a second shutter speed from up there, and they also provided a slightly slower lens. It was an f2 55mm lens instead of the f1.8. This is actually the f1.8. This is the slightly nicer lens on this one, but the one that came with the camera at the time was the slightly slower lens. But in terms of this 500th limitation here, it was actually just because of the way that the camera was built, it would have been more expensive to redesign the mechanicals to take out the 1000th of a second mechanism in there. So they actually left it in and simply took the paint off the dial that said 1000th of a second. So on here you've got the little clicky wheel goes from 250th to 500th, and if you click it again, there is another notch there, and 1000th of a second is actually still there. It has to be said, it's not factory calibrated like the other settings are, of course, because they didn't bother. It wasn't supposed to be on the camera, but it's a quicker shutter speed if that's what you want, and it's a bit hit and miss, but there you are, it's there if you want it. Other than that, it really is an identical camera to the S3, which is the top of the line one. So these were extremely accomplished cameras. The feel of it in the hand is very, very nice. They're not very big cameras, and certainly by today's standards of the big sort of professional DSLRs that people use, they are very, very tiny. In terms of size, to give it something to compare to, I'll show you the ultimate in kind of, I guess, small camera from the film SLR days, which was the Olympus OM1. And if you have a look at that side by side, you can see the OM1 is a smaller camera. It's a much more modern camera, of course, and it's got a lot more features. But it's it's a pretty tiny camera, but it's not that different. I mean, if you look at the width of it there, it's a little bit smaller that way. In terms of height, put the two up, again, it's probably hard to see. That's not a great camera angle for that. There we go. So we can see that the OM1 is smaller in all directions, but not by much. And certainly in terms of when this camera came out, it's a lot smaller than something like a Pentax FM or something like that. So it is really a very nice small camera to carry around with you. It's a very basic camera to use, it has to be said. There aren't any bells or whistles on it whatsoever. I've already mentioned the fact that there's no in-camera metering of any sort. The other omission really here is even a cold shoe, but there's no shoe, hot or cold, for the flash, so there's not really any way of doing that, although you do have some sync ports on the side there if you want to use that. The other things that you will probably sort of notice on here compared to other more modern cameras, you've got no self timer or anything like that, like you do with obviously something like the OM1, or even if you looking at the later Olympuses, if you compare it to a Spotmatic F, for example, you've got the self timer on there, and you've got the you've got the hot shoe on there and stuff like that, and things like a button on here which will lock the shutter. That's a nice feature that they put onto the Spotmatics, which is missing from these earlier cameras. So it is very, very basic, but to that end, it's also really a pleasure to use in terms of its limitations, because I don't mind just sitting there and using Sunny 16. I'm quite happy to do that. It's a perfectly acceptable way of metering, or you can use a separate external light meter if you want. I actually quite often just use my little Ricoh GR, the digital camera that I've got, and it has a built-in light meter, and it's not so different in size from a small light meter that people would carry in the 50s or 60s, and I'm quite content to do that, to get my metering done in that way. So it's a lovely little camera to use. It uses the standard M42 mount, so there's a ton of these lenses that are available for it. If you do ever come across these Takumar lenses, they're really worth picking up. There was a range of them, and the latest editions were the SMC Takumars. That's super multi-coated. Not only are they the automatic shutdown for the aperture, but they have a much better coating, which takes out glare and provides a lot better contrast and colour than the earlier editions did. The other notable point about the Takumar lens lenses, and it's by no means unique to the Pentax cameras. A lot of lenses at the time did have these, but it's worth pointing out that they are radioactive. I kid you not, these things do emit gamma radiation. It's fine in small doses, but if you're planning on spending all day with the thing up to your eye, it's probably not advisable, and don't sleep with them under your pillow. Other than that, they do produce extraordinary quality images, even by today's standards, and I actually have adapters for these lenses so that I can actually fit them to my my digital Nikon cameras, and the pictures are very, very sharp indeed. So that's it. This is the S1. Any of them are really good to look out for. In terms of price, you can pay silly money for them these days. They're starting to go up a little bit. I actually paid 25 quid for this camera, and it came originally with its the 55 f2. I then sold the 55 f2 for 30 quid because I had the 55 1.8, so I effectively made a profit on that and got the body for free, and still had a fiver to do whatever else with. So you can find good bargains on these all the time, and it's really worth looking out for because they will last forever and ever. So that's it. That's the Asahi Pentax S1. Thanks very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please click on the subscribe button just in the top of the screen there, and thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Cheers.
If you liked that video, click on these videos. You may well like them too. Cheers.